Right now, somewhere in Zambia, a woman is buying chlorine to put in her drinking water. She lives in a town called Chingola. She earns $4 a week. Chingola sits on top of one of the world's largest copper deposits, exporting $7 billion of it every year. Her country puts it on the national flag, the only flag on Earth with a mineral on it. She still can't drink from the tap. This is why. This story has 6 layers: geography, colonial, extraction, state failure, privatization, currency collapse, and a poisoned river. Every layer made the one after it possible. The flag that lied. In 1969, Zambia's GDP per capita was higher than South Korea's, higher than Singapore's. South Korea now builds semiconductors and launches rockets. Singapore had no resources at all. Today, its GDP per capita is 50 times Zambia's. What happened between 1969 and now is not a mystery. It's a system, and it was never designed to make Zambians rich. The number that should break the internet. In 2022, Zambia exported almost $7 billion worth of copper. The country is Africa's largest copper exporter that year. In that exact same year, 2/3 of Zambia's population lived in extreme poverty. That is not a statistic. That is Monica, still at her stall, still earning $4 a week. The copper is beneath her feet. Yet the money is in someone else's account, and the only flag on Earth with copper on it flies above both of those facts simultaneously. But how the copper got there and how it keeps leaving, that story starts long before any president or corporation or any deal. It starts with a map. Geography built the trap before anyone arrived. Before we talk about presidents or corporations or betrayal, we need to talk about the map, because the map is where this trap was first built. Zambia is landlocked. No coastline, no port. Surrounded on all sides by 8 countries. The nearest sea is over 1,000 kilometers away. Now here is what that costs. Getting a ton of copper from the Copperbelt to the nearest major port in South Africa currently takes 45 days by road. That journey cost, baked into every export contract Zambia has ever signed, is a permanent geographic tax on every single Zambian. Paid on every ton, every year for 60 years. And that is only the cost of getting the copper out. It says nothing about who gets paid for it once it arrives. And there is a railway being built right now, backed by the United States, that would cut that 45 days to 7. A 38-day difference. That project has been coming since colonial times. But the geography has one more trick. The Copperbelt, where almost all of Zambia's mineral wealth is concentrated, sits in the north of the country. The capital, Lusaka, is 400 kilometers to the south. The wealth and the government have never been in the same room. To put that in perspective, the Copperbelt sits closer to the war zones of eastern Congo than it does to Zambia's own capital. The wealth is near the instability. The government is near neither. Every tax dollar generated in the north has to travel 400 kilometers before it can be spent on anything. At every checkpoint between the mine and the ministry, it leaks. Geography made the corruption easier before corruption even arrived. And if all of that wasn't enough, Zambia has never fully known what it actually has. The country's first comprehensive geological survey since 1972 was only launched in 2023. For half a century, Zambia was negotiating mining contracts, setting royalty rates, and selling concessions, without a complete map of what it was giving away. The buyers almost certainly knew more about Zambia's copper than Zambia did. That is the geography. Permanent, unchangeable, built before any government made a single decision. But what those governments did with it, that is a different kind of disaster entirely. The moment it almost worked. For 1 decade after independence, something remarkable happened. Copper revenues actually built things. The Kafue hydroelectric dam, the railways, schools, hospitals, housing. A country that had been stripped under colonialism was using its own wealth to construct a future. And the numbers backed it up. GDP growth above 5% for 6 consecutive years. For the first time in Zambian history, a child born in the Copperbelt could expect a hospital to be there when they needed one. In 1969, Zambia was classified a middle-income country. This was not fantasy. It was happening. So what went wrong? In 1974, the price of copper collapsed on the London Metal Exchange. Not because of anything Zambia did. Not because the mines ran out. Because traders on the other side of the world decided copper was worth less. The schools half built in 1974 are still half built today. And here's the detail that makes this darker than it sounds. The Copperbelt towns, Kitwe, Ndola, Chingola, they were not normal towns. The mines had built them. The mines ran them. Water systems, hospitals, schools, security, all of it. The mine. When the copper money shrank, everything shrank with it, because there was no other provider. The towns existed for one reason, and that reason was now struggling. The crash was bad luck. A market event on the other side of the world. What came next was a choice, and it made things worse. Zambia took back the mine and broke them. You can understand why it happened. Foreign companies were extracting Zambian copper, and the profits were leaving the country. So in 1969, the Zambian government did what seemed logical. It nationalized the mines. The state mining company, ZCCM, would now run everything. If the copper would stay Zambian, then the wealth would stay Zambian. What actually happened was different. ZCCM became a machine for political patronage. Jobs were handed out as loyalty rewards, new investments stopped, maintenance budgets were raided, and for 25 years no meaningful exploration was carried out. While the mines went deeper and harder, the aged equipment couldn't keep up. Production halved. By the early 1990s, a mine employee in Chingola told a researcher he had bought a new plastic bucket to water his garden. When he realized he had been paid the equivalent of less than 50 plastic buckets a month, he quit. That was life under ZCCM. The company that owned Zambia's copper on behalf of 20 million people was paying its workers less than 50 plastic buckets a month. That was the company running the richest copper deposits in Africa. And then the people who were supposed to fix it arrived, with a solution that may have been even more destructive than the problem. Selling the family silver for less than it was worth. By the 1990s, ZCCM was broken. The World Bank and the IMF arrived with a solution. Privatize. ZCCM was broken up and sold like a looting exercise. The World Bank at the time called it the most successful privatization in Africa. The 40,000 people who lost their jobs in the following decade had a different view. The people living in towns that had been built for one reason, and that reason had just left. In Kitwe, a man who had spent 20 years pulling copper out of the ground walked to the tap one morning and found that water had stopped. A mother brought her child to the clinic and found the doors locked. A teacher arrived at school one morning and found the chalk had run out. There was no order coming. The private companies took the mines, they did not take the towns. The water systems, the hospitals, the schools, nobody took those. The local councils were too underfunded to absorb them. So entire cities lost their provider overnight. Not to another supplier, but to nobody. 3 eras, 3 different owners, colonial companies, then the state, then foreign corporations again. Each time the copper kept leaving. Each time Zambia was left with the hole in the ground and the bill. The economy that grows and impoverishes simultaneously. Here is the structure of the trap as it exists today. 70% of everything Zambia earns from the rest of the world comes from one metal. One. If copper prices fall, Zambia's hospitals run out of medicine. A country of 21 million people has outsourced its entire economic fate to a commodity price set on exchanges in London and New York. But the dependency is actually the smaller problem. There is something Zambia has been doing since the day of independence that nobody in the room where those deals get signed wants to talk about, and it's still happening today. Zambia sells raw ore. That ore leaves the country, goes to refineries, mostly in China, and is sold back to the world as wire, as batteries, as circuit boards, at 5 to 10 times the export price. The value of copper is not in the rock. It is in what the rock becomes. Zambia gets the rock price. Everyone else gets the rest. And when the rock price moved, Zambia had nothing to hold on to. In 2020, the copper price fell. The kwacha, Zambia's currency, lost more than 50% of its value in a single year. By 2026, it had lost 97% of its value against the dollar since 2020. This is what it means for a Zambian who spent his entire working life saving in kwacha. He has only 3 cents of real value left for every dollar he puts away. Not because they did anything wrong, because the price of copper moved on an exchange they have never seen. But a collapsing currency is something you can survive. What came next was structural. The debt had arrived. In November 2020, Zambia became the first African nation to default on its debt during the COVID pandemic. Public debt had reached 104% of GDP. Zambia had borrowed to build infrastructure to serve the mines. The mines kept running. The debt stayed. And then there is the number that makes all of this impossible to look away from. Between 2015 and 2022, a period when Zambia's economy was officially growing, poverty increased from 54% to 60%. The economy grew, poverty got worse. Both true in the same country at the same time. That should be impossible, and it would be unless the growth was never reaching the people producing it. Which raises a question nobody in those mining boardrooms wanted answered. Where exactly was the money going? Out of the country, into royalty structures, transfer pricing, and offshore accounts that Zambia's own tax authority lacked the capacity to audit. The copper left the country. The revenue followed it. And what that actually costs in a human life? Zambia's child mortality rate, 55.6 deaths per 1,000 births. Roughly 1 in 18 Zambian children dies before the age of 5. In a country exporting billions of dollars in copper every year, Zambia is borrowing money to service infrastructure for the mines while its children die of diseases that cost cents to prevent. But the economics are only half the story, because in 2025 the trap stopped being abstract. It became physical. Poisoned by the river that powers the clean energy revolution. There is one more layer to this, and it is the one happening right now in 2025. Zambia generates 83% of its electricity from hydropower. That sounds clean, except it's also catastrophically fragile, because in 2024 a drought hit, and when the water level in the reservoirs dropped, the power went off. 8 to 12-hour blackouts nationwide, crop yields fell 15%. The mines slowed, the currency fell further. GDP growth dropped from 5.4% to 4.0% in a single year. One dry season wiped out 2 years of growth, and nobody who lost their harvest got those 2 years back. A farmer in southern province who had planted on borrowed money lost everything. The drought took the harvest. The blackouts took the pump. There was no compensation for either. A country with $2 trillion of copper underground can be brought to its knees by a dry sky. But the drought is not the worst thing that happened in 2025. On February 18, 2025, a tailings dam collapsed at a copper mine near Kitwe. The mine was owned by a Chinese state-owned enterprise. 50 million liters of acidic, toxic mining waste entered the Kafue River, Zambia's longest river, the water source for approximately 12 million people. Fish died for 60 miles downstream. 500,000 people in Kitwe lost access to water. Farmers lost their crops. The river that supplies drinking water to Lusaka, the capital, turned acidic. Zambian farmers filed an $80 billion lawsuit against the mining operator. The farmers are suing for damages worth nearly 3 times the size of their entire national economy. $80 billion is not a number. It is the only way a smallholder farmer on the Kafue, whose fish ponds turned acidic overnight, can say, "This was not supposed to happen to us." Because the copper that is supposed to make them rich just poisoned their only water supply. Here's the detail that should stop you. The tailings dam had been placed illegally within 50 meters of a stream, a direct violation of Zambian environmental law. Regulators knew. Nothing happened, until 50 million liters were already in the river. This is not an accident. This is what happens when a country desperately needs mining investment, and every investor in the room knows it. The law exists. It was broken. The regulator knew, and the people who paid the price were the 12 million who drink from that river. You have probably heard Zambia described as a key partner in the global clean energy transition. Here is what that partnership looks like from Kitwe. And in the same month that diplomats were signing green energy apartments in Geneva, a mining waste spill was killing the river that 12 million Zambians drink from. The clean energy revolution had a supply chain, and that supply chain runs through Kitwe. Which brings us to where the story ends, or rather, where it refuses to end. The question the flag is still asking. Right now in 2025, something is happening in Zambia that has not happened before. 6 of the world's most powerful economic blocs are competing for Zambia's copper, from the United States to the European Union, all of them signing deals. $12 billion in mining investment pledges since 2022. The world has decided Zambia's copper is essential. Essential to power EVs, essential to run data centers, essential to build the grid that the clean energy transition needs. Essential for whom? That is the question the orange stripe on the flag has been asking since 1964. Monica is still at her stall in Chingola, still earning $4 a week, still sitting above the copper seam. The trap was not an accident, and the people inside it did not build it. The next video is about the country next door.